Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
So we heard the mortar registers go pop, 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 and then the rounds started to come in. They walked the mortar rounds straight across the fire support base. And I think the last one landed dead in front of my APC.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. John Brooker is a remarkable Australian veteran who shared his journey from the streets of Sydney, Australia to the battlefields of Vietnam. He begins his story recounting his early education and the chance encounter that led to him joining the Australian Military Reserve known as the Citizens Military Force, or CMF, an experience that would change the course of his life. The episode takes us through his training with the Royal New South Wales Lancers, where he first encountered the Centurion tank, and his transition to the regular army. One of the most gripping parts of the episode is his detailed account of his deployment to Vietnam. Our guest paints a vivid picture of the Tet Offensive of 1968, the intense firefights and the constant threat of enemy attacks. He shares the harrowing experience of being mortared for the first time and the adrenaline-fueled moments that followed. The story doesn't end on the battlefield. John also reflects on the challenges of returning to civilian life, the mixed reception from the Australian public and the Australian World War II veterans. I'm delighted to welcome John Brooker to our Cold War conversation.
I was born in Sydney, New South Wales. I was educated at Enfield Public School, and then I went on to the Croydon Park Technical School. Once I got through there, my father got me a job in engineering, so I was at Vincent's. They used to make plumbing supplies and worked on a lathe there. Then I went and worked for Smith's Industries. They made KLG spark plugs and Smith's Industries. It was an English company. You probably know of them anyway. So I worked there for a number of years, and one of the blokes there said, "Oh, I'm going to go up and join the CMF. Do you want to come?" And the CMF is the equivalent of your territorials, I think, over there. So I went along with him. I had no preconceived ideas of what I was getting into. I went along to have a look. He was going to join, and I went along with him. And from what I saw, I thought, well, this may be interesting. I may get something out of this. So I took the paperwork and went home, and my dad was a Second World War vet, so he had no issues with signing it. I don't think my mum cared one way or the other. So along I went, and I joined the CMF. I did my recruit training through the unit, and it was a tank unit. It was the 1st 15th Royal New South Wales Lancers. And their history stretches back to the Boer War and World War II. And they were equipped with Centurion tanks at that stage, or they were equipped with one Centurion tank, but they used to use the Centurion tanks of the Armoured Centre down in Victoria. So I did my initial training. I trained as a radio operator. Unlike the regular army where their trades were different, the CMF, you trade in one particular position on the tank and you worked your way through. So I did that, and I went to my first camp in Puckapunyal as a tank crewman, and our enemy at that stage was the 1st Armoured Regiment.
So, John, I just want to hold you there. I just want to drill a little bit more into your time with the Royal New South Wales Lancers. What was the training like there?
You had to go through the normal recruit training, square bashing, marching, shooting, whatever, the whole deal before, and you had to pass all that before you got to do your crewman training. So it was more like they used to do all the training in one place, not like the regular army where you train in Kapuka and do all your preliminaries, then you go to a core centre where you do your trade training, and then you post it to a unit. The 1st 15th, you did all your training in one unit. So you did your recruit training, which was your square bashing, your shooting, parades and everything. And then you did your technical training after that. And they had one Centurion tank there, which they mainly for the drivers to train on, because they had radio rooms for the radio operators, and they had a crewman training model for gunnery, which has sub-caliber on it, which the gunners used to train on. So the only way the tank drivers could keep their skills up was to train on an actual tank, and they had one there for them to do that. So I did my radio course. I never even got on that tank. The closest I got to was watching the drivers drive it in and out. We never got inside it, and I don't know whether any of the gunners got inside it, but it wasn't until we did our 2-week training at the Armoured Centre that we actually got into a vehicle.
So this was exercises, or was this further training where you were?
What happened was, for 2 weeks we went to Puckapunyal to the Armoured Centre, where the regular Army instructors took us through another 2 weeks of more intense training than what we were getting in Parramatta. So you did your final training and your final examinations at the School of Armour, or the Armoured Centre as it was known then, and you're assessed by the regular Army instructors, and then you were given a pass mark a pass mark for the level you'd attained. So I was lucky enough, I got a good pass mark and became the troop leader's operator. So that was good for me. But you also learnt there how to load the main armament, because the radio operators in the Centurion tank loaded the main armament. So we learnt to load the main gun, and we also learnt all the intricacies of the 30 caliber machine gun, because we operated that within the tank. So on the last couple of days of our time in Puckapunyal, we actually went out in the range where the gunners did their final assessment, and the radio operators did all the loading of the main armour and the machine gun for them. So it was fairly intense, but it wasn't hard. It was probably enjoyable, because you actually got hands-on, actually got to fire the main armour or load the main armour, and that was novel for us because we hadn't seen anything like that.
I mean, that sounds like quite a busy role, being radio operator, machine gunner, and loading the main armament.
Well, it was part of the crew drill. On the Centurion, you had the gunner who operated the gunnery, and the drivers drive it, and the radio operators mainly maintained the radios. That was the tuning it, and he also maintained part of the main armament and loaded and operated the machine gun, and he was responsible for all the stoppage drills. So yeah, it was new to me, and because I was interested, I was pretty good at it, actually. So that was at that point we went back to Parramatta with our assessments, and then we were allocated to vehicles, because at that stage we were in the squadrons, but we weren't allocated to a vehicle because we hadn't done any training. So once we qualified as a gunner or a radio operator or a driver, you were then allocated to somebody or tank crew. But anyway, I become the troop leader's operator, so I must have made an impression on somebody. And I thought, this looks good. I wouldn't mind doing this full time. So I went back home after the camp, and I thought about it for a while, and then I decided, well, I'll go and join the regular army, and I'll get into this. Being naive, I didn't know that you had to go through a process to get that far.
What was the initial training like for the regular army?
ARA, your initial training was at the Recruit Training Battalion in Kapooka, where you did your square bashing, you did your physical training, you did your weapons training, you did map reading, fieldcraft, pretty much the same as I did for the CMF, except when you got there as a CMF trained soldier, you thought, well, you knew what was going on, and in fact you didn't. The ARA training at Kapooka was more intense than we got in the CMF. We didn't do any physical training in the CMF, so when you get there to do the physical training at the ARA, it became as a shock because you sort of hadn't done any of that. I used to play rugby league, so I was pretty fit, but when I got down there, they soon sorted me out. I wasn't as fit as I thought I was. But you spend a lot of time marching, a lot of time doing weapons training. I think at that stage we had the SLR, the Owen machine carbine, and the automatic rifle, which was SLR that fired automatically and had a bipod. So we did those 3 weapons. At that stage, we didn't do hand grenades, but we did only the main 3 weapons. Did a lot of marching, long marches, and stuff that we hadn't done in the CMF. And the stuff we had done in the CMF, we covered again, but it was more intense. For me, I was lucky because I had done a lot of the square bashing, so I knew what was coming. But even so, at the end of the day, your feet were sore, I can tell you.
The fact you'd come from CMF, did that create a different attitude from them? I mean, did they sort of like say to you, look, you know nothing. You're now in the proper army, or, you know, how did they treat you?
No, they didn't. They didn't sort of harp on it. They didn't sort of say, "Oh, you come from the CMF. Well, this is the real army," and that wasn't mentioned at all. And I'm not 100% sure whether at the section level where the section corporals were training that they were aware that you had come from the CMF, unless if they had been told, they didn't mention it, and I wasn't going to mention it either, because I can see what would happen if you start mentioning, oh yeah, I'm come from the CMF, I know what's going on here, I know what would have happened. You'd have been targeted for sure, you know.
Yeah, not the best move there. Now, when you finish your initial training, how do they select you for the role that you're going to have in the ARA?
Well, when you go before the allocation board asks you where you want to go or what corps you want to join. And you've got to list 3 corps. So I said Armoured Corps, Engineers, and I think Artillery, figuring I'd get Armoured Corps because I was already Armoured Corps trained. And it was a bit of a hairy moment there because he wasn't going to send me to Armoured Corps. At that stage, they wanted people elsewhere. So I thought, I've done all this for nothing. So what happened, he said, okay, I'll allocate you to Armoured Corps. Out of our platoon, there was only 3 of us, I think, got allocated to Armoured Corps, and that's how we ended up there. You then go to Puckapunyal and you go to the Armoured Centre. And when you get to Armoured Centre, you go into First Forward Delivery Troop, which was the troop that you learnt your corps training, like you learnt the history of the Armoured Corps, and then you went through further physical training because we had a warrant officer there that liked to make us run hard. So we used to do the obstacle course every morning. Then we'd come back and we'd have lessons on the Armoured Corps, the history of the Armoured Corps, and customs and traditions. And during that period with First Forward Delivery Troop, while you were waiting to go on a course, you were assessed all the time, and then they'd ask you what you wanted to do. At that stage, most of the recruits that came to the into Forward Delivery Troop were going to be trained to go to 1st Armoured Regiment. It's before national service, so it was only regular army soldiers coming out of Kapuka. So out of a platoon, you might only get 2 or 3 that be allocated to armour, and it wasn't until they got enough people in Forward Delivery Troop to run courses that you got your actual course. So they would ask you what you wanted to do, and I put my hand up and said, "Oh, I want to do gunnery." So they said, "Okay, we'll let you do gunnery, but you've got to do radio as well," because the trade for gunner was gunner signaller. So you did gunnery and then you did radio. The guys that do gunnery and signalling, they had the potential to become crew commanders eventually, because you had to do radio and gunnery before you could advance to crew commanders, where the driver, he did straight driving. If he wanted to be a crew commander, then he had to go and do gunnery and radio. So everybody that actually did gunnery and radio were able to become crew commanders eventually when you got enough experience.
I guess, there was always the possibility, a bit like World War I and World War II, where Australia might have formed an expeditionary force and been sent to another location.
Yeah, but we're still training for the European theatre. Like the Centurion tank was a European tank, and it was designed for Europe. And we were still doing European tactics. Like we'd go from bound to bound, the tanks would jockey and push tanks forward, and the rest of the troop would come and join you on the bound, and you go to the next bound, and the troop would move up and join you. And it was all like the rolling hills of Europe, and that's how we were training for what we were doing. Vietnam was training for Vietnam, and training for Vietnam was still the same. We were still training on bound to bound, like we're training for Europe. We didn't do any sort of jungle training to prepare us to go to Vietnam, and I don't think at that stage anybody realised what they were getting into with armoured vehicles.
So you're going to be working with Centurion again. Was it an upgraded version to the one that you'd seen before?
Yeah. The ones we had in Puckapunyal were Mark 5s. So they were being upgraded from the Beezer machine gun of the Mark III up to the 30 caliber machine gun of the Mark V. The later Marks that we took to Vietnam were Mark V 1 Australian, had been upgraded again. They had a 100-gallon fuel tank. They had the new ballistic sight. They had the 50 caliber ranging gun. They had the upgraded glassy plate, and they were converted to infrared. So they were light years ahead of what we were using, firstly in the CMF, and secondly, the early ones we were using in Armoured Regiment. They were only Mark V's. So we got the roll through all the upgrades of the Centurion tank before they went to Vietnam. And of course that was my second tour. The first tour I did with APC. So I didn't actually get to see the Mark the 5 ones till I got to the Armoured Regiment 69 for my second tour. So.
And we will get on to that. With regard to service in Vietnam, did you have an option to not go, or was it, this is an order?
Volunteering. How I got to that point was we were up in the exercise Barrawinga that was up in Shoalwater Bay training area. Shoalwater Bay was a training area that the Army had just bought, and they were training the task force at that stage to go to Vietnam. So we'd gone from a carrier troop and a battalion to a task force in Vietnam. So all the extras that were going to Vietnam to make up that task force were on an exercise. It was exercise called Barrawinga up in Shoalwater Bay. That was up around Rockhampton, and it's really nice and warm up there. So 1st Armoured Regiment at that stage, we're not earmarked to go to Vietnam. So we were up there as umpire support staff. So we were supporting umpires. We had Ferret Scout cars. We had a couple of early model, or a couple of 113s that the regiment had been issued with. We had Land Rovers fitted for radio. And what we were doing, we were ferrying around all the umpire staff that were umpiring the exercise. During that period, the order room clerk came out and he said, "Who wants to go to Vietnam?" And we said, "Where's that?" So, everybody said, I wouldn't mind doing that. So we actually had to put in a transfer to the APC squadron, which was the only armoured unit going to Vietnam.
APC stands for Armoured Personnel Carrier. So this is a tracked vehicle designed to carry a small number of troops into battle.
So what would happen, the current APC squadron that was up there during training, once they finished that exercise, they were heading to Vietnam, and then they were going to rebuild another squadron in Puckapunyal to replace them in 12 months' time, which is what we went to. So everybody filled out their transfer papers to go to one APC squadron, and during the exercises, they decided who was going to go and who wasn't, because they weren't going to deplete the whole regiment and send the whole regiment to one APC squadron. They decided that they'd look through the list of who wanted to go, and then they'd pick who they were going to send. And they sent mainly drivers, current tank drivers, and some crew commanders, because I'd actually done my tank crew commander's course about six months before we went away on Barrawinga. So I'd actually completed a tank crew commander's course, and they sent a few tank crew commanders down as well, and a few gunner SIGs. So anybody that had a potential to become a crew commander on an APC, they picked them, and they're the guys that went down to 1 APC squadron. So when we actually got up to 1 APC squadron, we had to do a conversion course to the M113, and that was particularly new because it only had begun to arrive in about 65, I think they started to arrive. So the big bulk of those had gone to Vietnam to the squadron over there, or to build the squadron over there. So we only had limited number in Australia to train on.
How many crew were there in the 113 APC?
2.
So it's just you and the driver?
Yeah, except for at odd times, the section sergeant's vehicle used to carry a radio operator as well. So sometimes the section sergeant had 3, and the other 2 vehicles only had 2. The thing is, because space is limited in an APC and you carry a section of infantry, which at that stage was around about 12, so you didn't have a lot of room, and by the time they got in there with all their gear, it took up a fair bit of space.
I have driven a FE432.
Oh, them things, yeah.
Yeah, which was quite fun. I was told I was going too fast at one point.
Yeah, 432, you can never go fast in them. We trialled them out here. We trialled them out here with the M113s. At that stage, they were going to look at, they were either going to buy the M113 or the 432. The M113 sort of won out, but I still think they're using them over there in some degree, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense you sticking with the M113 in hindsight with your involvement in Vietnam, because at least there was a spares options there with the US. Yeah,
I think the deal they got was probably a bit to do with it too, because the first section that went, or the first troop that went over to Vietnam, they were actually trained by the American people from FMC Corporation, because at that stage nobody in Australia had any idea how to drive them or service them. They sort of arrived in Australia with the FMC civilian people, and then decided, we'll send a troop to Vietnam with the 1 RAO group to 173rd Airborne. And they realised, how are we going to train the people? Nobody in Australia has done any training on them. So they're actually trained by the civilian guys from FMC.
And how much did you know about what was going on in Vietnam at that point?
Very little. We knew that there was a place called Vietnam, and we knew that the task force that was on the exercise was going there. We didn't know a hell of a lot about what was happening. We didn't know, we never told what we may expect. Training for Vietnam for us was out on Puckapunyal Range with 1 troop of APCs to train a squadron, and no radios. We didn't have any radios in the APCs or intercom. You controlled your driver by tapping him on the shoulder with a stick. Right shoulder for turn right, left shoulder for turn left. Tap on the head to stop. And if your tap on the head was too severe, it caused problems. We had, I think from memory, we had 6 50 caliber machine guns, because we hadn't seen a 50 caliber machine gun. We'd only ever used 30 calibers. So we had to learn the intricacies of the 50 caliber, how to strip it, how to put it together, how to headspace and time it, and more how to shoot the damn thing, because we hadn't had any experience with them. So we pintle mounted those on the APCs, and we fired them off the APCs. But we still hadn't seen any radios, because they didn't have enough radios to equip the Australian vehicles and the Vietnam vehicles as well. So all the Vietnam vehicles got the priority for radios and harnesses. So, in fact, I didn't see the radio set up until I got to Vietnam itself.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Did they tell you what sort of role you were going to be doing there?
We were training as an APC squadron, so our primary role was lifting up and moving the infantry. When we got there, we did more than that. We used to go out as APCs, but we'd go out up on the roads. We'd do the road runs, and then we'd operate through the rubber plantations, across the paddy fields, along the beaches, everywhere and anywhere. We did lift infantry, and then we'd sort of sit around and wait for them to finish their task and pick them up again and move them somewhere else. Because we had the heavy machine guns, we could offer fire support, but only limited fire support. And when they went to the 74C twin 30 caliber turrets, the fire support wasn't as heavy as the 50 caliber. And the problem with the 74C turret, you needed right and left hand feed 30 calibers, which we didn't have. We only had the normal feed, which is the right hand feed 30 caliber. So we had two right hand feed 30 calibers that didn't work in a 74C turret. So in fact, the 74C turret only really had one operational 30 caliber that you could use. We went through all sorts of weird and wonderful setups to try and make the other 30 cal work. You get about half a dozen rounds through it and the whole thing would jam because of the way it was fed. So they did try to acquire left-hand feed 30 caliber machine guns, but they never materialised. Effectively, took a 50 cal off, put a turret on, and all we had was one effective 30 caliber machine gun, which in the jungle is not, you might as well throw rocks.
Can you describe to me the day that you arrive in Vietnam and what you see, what you hear, what you smell?
Oh, yeah. We left for Vietnam from Darwin. We flew up to Darwin, and that was the first culture shock because I got off the plane in Darwin. This heat hits you right in the face. So we actually stayed over the RAF base in Darwin. And on the RAF base, they had a transition area for people coming and going from Vietnam. And Darwin is 32, 33 degrees most of the year. And they had us sleeping in a Lysart hut. And a Lysart hut was made out of tin. And of course, a Lysart hut out in the open in 30-degree heat is like an oven. So even to cool down at night, the hut was still hot. So they had a bar on site. So we went to the bar, and there's a few blokes transitioning back from Vietnam, and they're armoured blokes, and we're actually going over to probably to replace those fellas. So they said, they sort of tell us a bit of what we could expect, which didn't really, after actually getting there, it's hard to work out how they described it, and it wasn't anything the way they described. So they said, here's some Vietnamese money. We won't need it where we're going, but you might need it. So they give us this Vietnamese money, so away we went. So next morning we loaded on a Hercules to go to Vietnam. So we all got on the plane. As you go on the plane, you get a little white box, that's your lunch, and a little tin of chocolate, that World War II chocolate, by the way. So we said, what's the chocolate for? If the plane crashes, that's your emergency ration. So that's a good start. We're getting on a plane with a white box with our lunch in it and a tin of chocolate that we got to eat if we crash. So that didn't really instill any confidence in us at all. So away we went, got on the plane, flew to Vietnam. So we landed in Vung Tau. Now, in our preliminary training to go to Vietnam, they told us, they outlined what the Viet Cong wore, what sort of weapons the Viet Cong carried, how the Viet Cong operated. And we got all those lectures, and we told that the Viet Cong all wore black pajamas. So, right, that we could relate to that. And most of them wore little straw conical hats. And, right, so they wore black pajamas, they wore little conical hats, and they carried AK-47s. So the Hercules lands at the airport in Vung Tau, and as they lifted the back of the Hercules, all these people were on the tarmac in black pajamas and conical hats. And we said, shit, what's happened here? And they, in fact, were the workers in the airport are now chipping weeds off the tarmac. It was a concrete tarmac, and they were chipping all the weeds. And little did we know that everybody in Vietnam wore black pajamas and conical hats. So how the hell are we going to work out? These airport workers weren't the Viet Cong. How are we going to work out who the Viet Cong is? The only reason we're going to know is that Viet Cong's got black pajamas and conical hats, and he's carrying a rifle. So that was a good start. So then we get all our stuff off the plane, and we go to these trucks, and they're going to take us up to Nui Dat. So Vung Tau was the logistics base, and that was pretty well established, and that was a peaceful part of Vietnam as far as Australia was concerned. We were going to Nui Dat, and that was what these guys down in ALSG considered the sharp end. So we get on the truck. We've got our weapons with no ammunition. So here we are sitting on the truck, going to the sharp end with our weapons and no ammunition. So we said, we're not going up to the sharp end until you give us something to put in these weapons. So I had a 9mm pistol, so they give me about half a dozen 9mm rounds. What I was going to do with that, I don't know, but anyway, I had 6 rounds. And the blokes we took Owen machine carbines at that stage before they come out with the new F1. So they gave the blokes with the Owen machine carbine, they got about 10 rounds. So that's about one burst. So we get on these trucks, not confident that these blokes are going to be able to get us up the sharp end in one piece. So away we go. Eventually we got there, and there was no problem at all getting up there, and it wasn't really tiger country, but the smell. You can't describe the smell of the place, And then we went through. There's a place up there called Cat Low. Now Cat Low is a fishing village, and they make dried fish. You could smell Cat Low 3 kilometres before you got to it. It was a terrible place, and we always knew when we used to go down to Vung Tau on for various reasons, you always knew when you're getting close to Cat Low because you could smell it. But the country itself, nice country, but some of the smells like you wouldn't believe. It's a distinctive smell, and you never forget it.
I've heard similar descriptions of Korean veterans saying that Korea had quite a distinctive smell as well. So you arrive at your operational base. How soon are you sent on your first mission?
We arrived in the afternoon, and I met my driver because the crew commander of the vehicle I was taking over had already gone home, and I met the driver, and he said, "Oh, well, come down and I'll show you the vehicle." So we went down, and I had an APC with a 74C turret on it, and I finally saw the radios. I said, "Oh, are they the radios?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you tune them?" He said, "Don't you know?" I said, "No, we haven't seen them." So he said, "Oh, this, and this." Oh, well, that's simple enough. It was all unlike the English radios we were using where you had to tune them with the dials. You just select the frequency. All the frequencies there, all you do was just twist and select. So that was pretty simple. The intercom system was very similar to the system we were using on Centurion, so that was easy to pick up. And the good thing about it, the headset had the microphone boom, and you just switched on the breastplate and flicked for intercom and pressed the switch across to talk on the radio. So that wasn't hard. It was pretty simple. And every morning, the APCs used to do a clearing patrol out in front of our base area. So the next morning, it was our section's turn to do the clearing patrols. That was the first time I went out. So we got a couple of days to acclimatise before we went anywhere. I think our first outing as a troop, we went up to the village of Binbar. So you may be familiar with the Battle of Binbar. Well, this has preceded that. So we went up, we did a road run as a troop because we'd all recently arrived in Vietnam and we hadn't done a lot as a troop. So as a troop, we went up to Binbar, did a run up to Binbar. Went out in the Binbar airstrip, sat there, then came back to Nui Dat. So that was our first outing as a troop, but it wasn't much after that we started to operate more as a troop, taking the infantry out. I think we did run out took an infantry patrols out to the old Long Tan, where the Battle of Long Tan was. They used to regularly patrol through there. We used to take infantry groups up around Bin Bar, Binjir, down the other side of Dat Do to the Long Highs. So sometimes we go out for a day, sometimes we go out for a couple of days, depending what the operational tempo was, what task force headquarters decided they were going to do, and where they were going to put the infantry. The infantry used to do a lot of advanced to contact stuff. We'd drop them in a certain spot, then we'd sit there, and then we'd go and pick them up later and put them somewhere else. So it was used to do a fair bit of work, and you'd probably go in the field sometimes a week, sometimes 2 weeks. We do a lot of fire support base security. I think one day, a couple of times, we took the American guns up. They did a fire mission up around Bin Bar. We sat with them for the day as protection and brought them back because they're mobile artillery. So we brought them back to Nui Dat. Then we're always on 5 minutes notice to move. If there's ever a contact, then we had to take infantry out. We're always on 5 minutes. So we're always prepared, ready to go. We used to keep what we used to call getaway bags on the vehicles with enough clothing and stuff for 3 or 4 days. If you got reacted, you would probably go out for 2 or 3 days. We used to keep rations on the vehicle, water, ammunition. In fact, you had to have your vehicle ready to go at all times because you never knew what your requirement was going to be, or if you were going to be called out or reacted or whatever. You had to be prepared for it. We'd stand to every night. Everybody stood to in the task force at last light, and you stand to for about half an hour, and then you'd stand down. Then the pickets would go on. We used to do vehicle pickets. Each troop area had a vehicle picket at night, and you were connected to radio to the CP, and they'd regularly do checks at night to make sure you weren't asleep. But at night over there, we used to have movies. The task force wasn't blacked out, but it wasn't lit up like some of the American bases either. Most of the task force hierarchy were in the middle of the task force, so there wasn't a lot of light there. We had not a lot of tent lights close to the perimeter track, but we did do, as I say, we had movies of a night, but they were sort of in the middle of our base there. The recreational hut and the boozer and the theatre was all right in the middle, so there wasn't much light going out that people could see. So from that aspect, right, it was a bit hard for us, but you got used to it.
How did you feel when you went out on your first mission where you knew there was a chance you might be under fire?
I didn't think about it. Didn't think about it like that. We sort of got going, and you're too busy looking at where you're going. You're too busy looking around to see that you weren't going to get shot at for a start. And if you did get shot at, you go into your contact drills anyways. I never thought much about it. They sent us when they sent us out, we were sort of just relieved to get out of the camp and start doing something. We'd been training to do this for months, and to finally get out and do it was more of a like excitement for us than than thinking we were going to get shot at. Thinking we're going to get shot at was probably in the back of our mind, but not a priority for us. Later on, when we did get shot at, was a different thing. But I think if you go out with that thought that you're going to get injured, then you don't operate at your best. You got to put it in the back of your mind. It's inevitable that you could get shot at, but you say, oh, what the heck? We'll get shot at, we'll shoot back.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think that is a very natural thing to do is to try and put it to the back of your mind. Can you describe your first experience of being under fire?
Really intense fire. We were up in Benoit. We were sent up there as a blocking force for the Tet of 68. The big Tet of 68 where the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong attacked Saigon. We're up in a little village called Trang Bom. Trang Bom was, I think it was a main Viet Cong exit route out of Saigon. And we were a blocking force, and we had a fire support base at Trang Bom. They had American SP guns, they had infantry, engineers, and they had an APC troop in Trang Bom, and we were another APC troop. We were further over. And then when the APC troop in Trang Bom left and went back to Nui Dat because Maria had been attacked by the Viet Cong as part of Tet, they went back to Nui Dat and we took over in Trang Bom. Then we had to take an American gun into Bearcat, which was their big base in Benoit, for a service job. So we took the gun down. They got service. We waited for it. We brought it back, and then we went into stand 2. After stand 2, we stood down, and about an hour after that, we got heavily mortared. So I'd never been mortared before. So we heard the mortar registers go pop, 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 and then the rounds started to come in. They walked the mortar rounds straight across the fire support base. And I think the last one landed dead in front of my APC. We were behind a big earthen bun that they had bulldozers put there, and we parked behind that earthen bun, and the mortar bomb landed in the earthen bun and covered us in dirt and crap. And then we thought, oh, this is not good. And I heard a bloke knocking on the back door of the APC because we'd closed down, and he said, they're out the front. I said, what do you mean they're out the front? He said, they're coming up the little rise. So I put my head up, and at that stage I had a new carrier with a 50 caliber on it. And he said, I said, where are they? He said, behind the rock. I said, how many of them? He said, I don't know. I said, how can they be behind the rock? It's not big enough to hide behind. He said, oh, that's where they were. So I put a burst of 50 cal out there, and they weren't there, but he must have seen something, but there was nothing there. So we got moved back into the centre of the fire support base to protect the CP, and then we were going to go out and try and find where the mortar base plate was, but they said, no, you can't. We don't want you to go out. You've got to stay here and protect the fire support base. And it wasn't until the next morning where we went out and found the base plate, or where the base plate was. So they brought the base plate in little Lambrettas, and they'd fired the mortars, threw it all back on the Lambretta and nicked off. So had we gone out, we wouldn't have found them anyway. But I'd never been mortared before, and there was a few bits of small arms come in, but it didn't hit anybody. But the mortars did damage. They blew up the cook tent of the American mobile guns, so they weren't happy about that. We had a crew that was sleeping outside the APC because it was stinking hot, and the whole 3 of them got frag wounds from the mortar bomb. It landed pretty close to them, and they all got wounded and dusted off. So that wasn't good for them. But apart from that, there wasn't too much more damage. But it was more to upset us than anything else that they'd fired the mortar bombs, and then we stood to all night. So that wasn't good, and they'd all gone home to bed. So, but yeah, till you get mortared, you really don't know what it's like, you know. And that was the only time. That was the only time that I really got. I hadn't yet. When we got mortared, it was like an adrenaline rush. You couldn't go to sleep because you're waiting for the next part of it, and the next part never came. So they mortared us and nicked off, and we thought we were going to get attacked like in all the American movies. They mortar you, then they attack the wire, but they mortared us and they didn't attack the wire. So that was my first experience really of real combat stuff. You had bits and pieces, but nothing like that.
Yeah, that must have been really unnerving for them to be that close.
Yeah, well, we'd been out patrolling around the fire support base the day before, and when we went out and found the mortar base plate, it was somewhere where we'd been the day before. So they must have watched us go through there and come back out and go to the fire support base, and they couldn't have taken those mortar base plates in the daytime. They must have took them in fairly late, because they didn't mortar us until about 10, 12 o'clock at night. So they must have brought them in late in the afternoon or early evening when we'd finished doing patrols through there. There was an ambush patrol out, and they ambushed a group that were coming in. They must have been coming in to attack the fire support base we were in, and the ambush group that were out there, I think it was a group of engineers. They were in an ambush position, and they ambushed a group coming in towards the fire support base. So they must have been going to mortar us, then attack from another position, but the ambush stopped them in their tracks. So they didn't come any further in. So it was an eventful night, I can tell you that.
When you were describing, taking the infantry out for operations and things like that, did you see any of the enemy on those, or were they, further forward than the positions you were in?
Usually further forward. We used to drop the infantry off, and they probably didn't know where the enemy were either. They sort of patrolled through particular places, and if they got a contact, they'd deal with the contact. Most of the times where the contacts were, the APCs couldn't get in. When I was with tanks, we could, but APCs struggled in the heavier jungle. Light stuff, they were okay. Heavier jungle, they struggled with. Bamboo, they bounced off. APCs had trouble penetrating bamboo, and to be honest, there was a lot of time we didn't go into the bamboo anyway, because it's rotten stuff and it gets all over you. So, but yeah, bamboo's not good for APCs. They couldn't penetrate it. And because they had rubber inserts on the tracks, the jungle wasn't the best place for them to operate. And in the jungle, or parts of the jungle, or even light jungle, the Vietnamese used to cut down the trees and take them away and like cut them up and make charcoal out of the wood. But they used to leave the stumps, and we often belly on a stump that we couldn't see. Once the jungle grows over the top of the stump, you don't see it till you belly on it, and you're sort of sitting on the stump and your tracks are spinning and you're going nowhere. So you had to sort of recover off that. So you had to be fully aware of stumps, and B-52 craters are another obstacle that we had encountered, because the jungle used to grow the bomb craters, and before you knew it, you're in one. Because you got to remember that the Americans and the French and everybody else operated over there before we got there. And there used to be a lot of bombs dropped in the province we worked in, and that was all done before we got there. So we found a lot of the bomb craters by accident because they'd been overgrown. So it's pretty hard in that respect with an APC. So yeah, we used to drop the infantry. The infantry would do their thing. We'd pick them up again. and then if it was late at night, we go into a night position with the infantry and the carriers, and then we proceed on the next morning, depending on what the operation is, what the task was.
Was there a fear of, you being spied on by the civilians around you?
Yeah, all the time. You had to be careful. Whenever you stopped, you'd attract kids, and you'd attract little kids, big kids, and older kids. Everybody over there was a spy as far as we were concerned. Men, women, children. You never knew which ones were friendly. Well, they're all friendly, but you didn't know what their intent was. They'd always, wherever you stopped, they'd come out of nowhere, and you often wonder how they got there and how they knew you were going to be where you were. So, yeah, everybody was a suspect, if you like. And especially mentioned Trang Bom, once we got mortared, we moved all the civilians. We didn't let any civilians anywhere near the fire support base at all. We kept them back at least 200 yards back from the fire support base. We used to go out there and move them back all the time. We didn't want them any, and we figured that the reason that the Americans got hit and their guns got hit is because people were standing there working out where everything was, and then the mortars knew exactly they knew the mortars when they dropped them, they knew exactly where to put them. So we're obviously being spied upon, and targets were plotted.
How long were you in Vietnam for that first tour?
12 months. I arrived in 24th of April, 67, and I think I left on the 23rd of April, 68. So, yeah, I went back. Yeah, I did, a couple of days short of 12 months.
Right, and you returned back to Australia. What's your role there when you returned back?
When I came back, I was posted to the School of Armour, which it changed its name from the Armoured Centre to the School of Armour. I was posted back in the tank hangar as corporal in charge of gunnery in the tank hangar. I used to look after all the gunnery gear because we had a squadron of tanks that we used to use for training. And they were the same tanks that we used to loan out to the CMF units when they came down. So we're responsible for maintaining all the gunnery gear. The DNS corporal used to look after all the driving and servicing stuff. So we had a group of guys that were actual tank gunners, and they used to look after all the gunnery gear, keep it serviced, clean, operational. And the driving and servicing guy used to look after all the running gear and mechanicals. So we used to supply the tanks to the training wings, and we used to supply tanks to the CMF units when they come down for their annual camp. So we used to have to keep them all in order so they could come and use them. I also did my gunnery instructor's course while I was there in 68, and then in early 69, I think it was, I was told I had to go and see the CO down at Centre Headquarters. So I went down there and they called me in and they said, "Oh, we see you're a tank crew commander." I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "Right, do you want to go back to Vietnam with A Squadron as a tank commander?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'll do that." And I said, "Okay, march out to the tank squadron." They must have figured I was going to go back because I had all my posting orders there when I walked out the door.
And so you're going back as a Centurion tank commander. How was the Centurion used in Vietnam? Because the sort of scenario you've described before with the APC is it's quite close country.
Yep.
It's not like the open areas of northwest Europe that you've been trained for.
No, the tanks went back and they did a lot of jungle work. I was lucky I had a tank dozer with a dozer blade on the front. So I used to go out with every single troop. I used to be attached to a troop depending on the operation. The tank dozer was used to prepare launching spaces for the bridge. We had bridge layers as well. So if a bridge layer went out, the tank dozer went out. If the bridge layers didn't go out, then the tank dozer would go out with a tank troop if they decided that the tank dozer would be of value. So I did a lot of bunker busting, if you like, with a dozer. We used to sort of doze the bunkers in rather than blow them up. So I did a lot of work like that. That was really good.
So if you came across an enemy bunker, you'd demolish it. But had the infantry cleared it, or somebody else cleared it by then?
Oh yeah, normally if it was cleared, then we'd doze the bunker in rather than waste ammunition or engineers' time blowing them up. It's just as quick to doze them, and because the dozer blade would dig down fairly deep, so we'd make a mess of them. Just as much, we'd do just as much damage to them with a tank dozer as what they'd do with explosives, and it took less time.
Was there any danger from anti-tank mines where you were operating?
Always a problem with anti-tank mines. Various troops over there had hit anti-tank mines. Well, they were more IEDs than anti-tank mines. They used to mine culverts and mine the road, and what would happen, you'd run over a bamboo trip switch and it'd blow they used to use 105 rounds that they had captured, or explosive that they'd got out of old bombs and stuff. So they used to they'd wrap C4 in big bundles and put them under the road, or they put them in potholes and pour water in them. So you had to be careful of the potholes because they could have anything in them. But they'd be offset switches, so you'd actually run over the switch, and they had two little batteries, and they had a bamboo switch, and you'd run over the switch and it'd make the contact, and by the time you'd hit the switch and moved on, the mine would be underneath you. So they used to use a lot of those. Most of the time it used to blow the tracks in half, and we'd have to stop and fix the tracks. And then because we had to stop and fix the tracks, the engineers had to scan the area to make sure it was safe before we moved on. So what it did is it slowed everything down, because it stopped everything while we cleared the area, and we couldn't go on until we cleared the area. They'd put the mines in places where they knew you had to come onto the road, because we never used to travel on the road if we'd travel off the road, but there were certain places where you had to come on the road, and that's where they'd put them. So you had to be very careful. And they used to put mine indicators out so that Viet Cong in the area would know there's a mine there. And if you're lucky and spot the mine indicator, like it was a broken branch or a bit of bamboo laying in a certain way, if you're quick enough to pick it up, you knew something was wrong, you could sort of stop and search for the mine anyway. But you didn't always pick it up because we were moving fairly quickly, unless you're really, really attentive. Sometimes you didn't pick it up.
So you had situations where you'd hit one of these and it would take a track off?
Oh, yeah. It would snap the pin and the track would come off and probably damage a few links. But we carried enough links to repair it. But the problem is it takes all time to do it. And if you're on an operation where time was a factor, you slowed it all down, because it'd take a while to fix a track. There's some mines that have blown suspension stations off, so that was a big job. We had to fly suspension stations in and fit them on the in situ. So that took a lot of time.
But the mines generally weren't powerful enough to penetrate the armour. Yeah,
a couple were. We lost a couple of blokes, blew up under the driver's compartment, and killed the drivers. So yeah, the belly of the tank. If they got them under the belly of the tank, that was the thinnest part of the armour. So they could penetrate if they got it. And the other part about if they set it off underneath the tank itself, and it doesn't penetrate because all the ammunition was stored under the floor, it could split open the ammunition cases, and the propellant could catch fire and that was another problem we had.
And were there any attacks with RPGs? Did they ever use those?
Yeah, RPG-2s. That's how the Battle of Bin Bar started. They fired an RPG-2 at a tank travelling up the road, and actually it was a replacement tank that was going up to a troop further north. It came through Bin Bar. They fired a RPG at it. It penetrated the turret, but RPG-2s lost of a lot of velocity rather than it doing a lot of damage. It did penetrate the turret, but it didn't do a hell of a lot of damage. And that tank went through to the Armoured base further up the road, and they radioed back. The ARV that was with them turned around and went back to Nui Dat, and that's when the operation of the Battle of Bin Bar started. There have been other instances where RPGs have hit vehicles. I'll probably send you some photos of RPG damage. You can have a look at them.
That would be really useful, because what I do is a separate episode page on the website which gives photos. So if you can share me any photos you've got, or what would be really useful is a photo of you in service while you're in Vietnam.
Yep, I'll send you some photos of myself. I'll send some photos of the tank dozer, the bridge layers, and I'll send some photos of RPG damage to vehicles and mine damage to vehicles, so you get some sort of an idea of just the damage that can be sustained by those sort of mines.
Excellent. I mean, from people I've spoken to, there's quite a fondness for the Centurion. Would you have called it a reliable vehicle?
It was in Vietnam. In Australia, we didn't use them a lot, as much as we should. And when we used to go out on exercises in Puckapunyal, we had a lot of problem with reliability. But in Vietnam, because we were running them all day, every day, over and over and over, the reliability was good. It's like anything mechanical. If you don't run it, it doesn't work. Centurion is one of those vehicles that if you run it all the time and look after it, it does a good job. It's like anything though. Things happen and you can't help it. But if you keep them serviced and keep them, like we used to run them all the time over there, and they used to be reliable as anything. Used to get hot though, and because it's very hot over there, the vehicles get hot, and we had a lot of trouble with radiators. The radiators used to get a lot of gunk in them, and we didn't have any pressure washing facilities over there to clean the radiators out. So sometimes the vehicles would overheat, and we'd have to stop for a while and let them cool down. But other than that, they were very reliable.
How often was the main armament of the Centurion used?
It depended on the operation. If we went into a bunker system, or if we got called into a bunker system by the infantry, we would fire a lot of canister rounds. Canister rounds would clear the vegetation, and then if the bunkers were occupied, which most times they weren't, when we got in there, we'd fire APC, BC rounds into them because they were kinetic energy round. They'd go in and collapse the round. We wouldn't fire HE necessarily because it's too dangerous in close country, and it took a few feet for it to arm. So we'd fire APC, BC in preference to, but we did fire HE onto targets further out, but we'd fire them as a H&I sort of setup. We'd fire H&I at night if we had to, but we wouldn't fire main armament rounds unless we had to, because we had to rely on a supply chain from Australia. Ammunition wasn't in short supply, but you didn't want to waste it either.
Yeah, because you were a different caliber from any of the American.
Yeah, we were 20 pounds, was 8.34, and the Americans were using 90 millimeters. So I think we're 8.34, and they were 90 millimeters. So their ammunition wasn't compatible, and we had to bring all our ammunition in from Australia. So even though it wasn't in short supply, we didn't waste it either.
Yeah, you didn't want to be short at some crucial moment.
No. Well, canister, we used to fire a lot of canister because canister rounds used to clear the foliage a lot, and then it would expose bunkers. And like APC, BC, we'd clear them out. But other than that, we'd fire long range HE if we had to. If we requested we fire long range HE, we would. But rather than strip the ammunition from the vehicle, if we were going to fire long range HE onto a target, they would bring ammunition out and we'd fire it. And rather than using the vehicle ammunition storage, they'd bring separate ammunition out for that sort of. If we're in one spot, I think we used to fire onto the long high ranges, but we'd fire from a certain spot close to the target, and they'd bring the ammunition out and we'd fire onto the target. So I think I've got some photos of that too I can give you.
And the Dozer tank had the same main armament as the other Centurions?
Yeah, right. Exactly the same. The only difference between the Dozer tank and the normal Centurion was the hydraulic rams on the front, and it used to run a hydraulic pump off the back of the engine. So on the front of the engine rather, there was a hydraulic pump that used to work the hydraulic rams on the front of the tank.
You're in Vietnam until January 71. Are you sorry to leave at that point?
No, I'd had enough after 2 tours. 12 months over there is enough. 6 months, 6 months is probably a little short, but after 12 months, I think you're ready to go. Yeah, on the second tour, I thought I was happy to go. I thought I'd had enough. But saying that, we didn't know at that stage that the whole thing was going to be over in like closely up through the middle of 71. It started to wind down. I think the tank started to leave in 71. The Cav stayed a bit longer. But we fully expected to go. I fully expected to be back over there on a third tour because I didn't know how long it would keep going. So I was fully prepared to go back on another tour, whether I went back with Cav or tank. At that stage, I didn't know, and I didn't because I didn't know how long I was going to go for, and neither did anybody else. And we were surprised that the tanks were pulled out early anyway.
Yeah, because I think it's 1970 that Australia starts their drawdown of forces in Vietnam.
Yeah, I think the tanks, from memory, they started withdrawing the tanks mid-1971, I think. They started to pull a troop out at a time. The Cav stayed a bit longer, but yeah, mid-71, I think. After Operation Overlord, I think they started to pull tanks out. I think the Bridges and the Dozers went first.
What was the feeling of the Australian population around your nation's involvement in Vietnam?
I don't think I knew enough about it early on to form any sort of an opinion. But later on, when the Americans started to protest about their troops being there, it sort of filtered down over here. And they started to get the demonstrations over here. And there was demonstrations against national service because we had national servicemen going to Vietnam with the not only infantry but all through the army that was actually going. National servicemen played a big part in all of that, and people started to object to that, and a lot of the young blokes that were sort of could have been called up saying, hell no, we don't want to go. So that started another movement out here similar to America, and I think they had a moratorium here, and it was getting fairly bad out here. I think the union at one stage stopped all our mail, and that didn't go over well. Then they stopped a lot of supplies going over on the ship, and they stopped all of our Australian beer, and that didn't go over well at all because we had to drink American shit, and that wasn't very good either. So, yeah, we used to get the news in the papers when they came over, but they're usually about a couple of weeks old. From our perspective, we thought we were being hard done by the people in Australia objecting because they really were uninformed about what was going on. They used to see it on television, but it was nearly all American stuff. They did see Australian stuff, and they formed opinions on what they were being fed and not what was actually going on.
How were you received when you got home? Because, American veterans from the Vietnam War were shunned when they returned home, from what I understand.
Same for us. Yeah, we were pretty much shunned. We used to fly in at midnight and get ushered out of the airport. I mean, I was lucky. I flew into Sydney and my parents were there to pick me up. We went through customs, got paid, got a leave pass, and shunted out as quick as they could get us out. So, and we used to fly in at midnight, so we never had any demonstrators at the airport at midnight. So we weren't confronted with that problem. When we went to join the RSL, we thought, we've done our bit for the country, we're entitled to join the RSL. They give us a hard time as well, because they reckon that we hadn't been to a war. It wasn't World War I or World War II. We hadn't been to a real war, so we shouldn't be allowed to join. And we weren't too happy about that at all. And changed now, but you never forget.
What does RSL stand for?
Returned Servicemen's League. Okay. I think that's the same as the British Legion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but it's the Australian version of the British Legion. Like, that's formed for your ex-service guys, I think, the British Legion. Well,
yeah, it's regardless of whether you served in a combat zone or not, the British Legion.
Yeah, well, RSL back in when we joined was was different. It was all mainly Second World War guys were running it, and they thought that we hadn't fought in a real war, so we really didn't qualify. So
that's really sad, that sort of treatment you got there. But when you were discharged, you went back into Civvy Street, and you also formed the 1st Armoured Regiment Association.
Yeah, I formed it with an ex-RSM, Lou Walker. He sort of started the ball rolling, and I sort of came in on the and to assist him. But yeah, he started it, and we sort of got the ball rolling, and it's still going. We're still up and running. It was mainly to keep all the guys that had served over there together, and it worked to a degree, but it's mainly there to keep everybody that served in the regiment now in touch with one another. That's the reason it was formed, and I think the 3rd Cavalry Regiment did the same. They formed an association to keep everybody intact. But we're all aging now, so we want to more attract the younger guys in the regiment now, because we've had guys that serve over in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that now. So it's their turn to sort of take it on.
Yeah. You got awarded the OAM in 2008. What's an OAM?
Order of Australia Medal. It's the equivalent of the old OBE, CBE, BE sort of thing.
And that was for your services to ex-serving members.
Yeah, ex-serving members of the 1st Armoured Regiment, yeah.
The episode extras, such as videos, photos and other content, are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.